Okay, and good evening and welcome to the Carlam Cymru revision sessions that we're running. This is the Media Studies AS revision session for you. So my name is Miss Hales and I'm going to be presenting this evening. If you have any questions, just pop them into the chat facility in which we are monitoring and we should be able to respond to you. And today we're going to recap what we've covered in the last 3 sessions. Now, obviously, if you wanted to go back and revise any of the things that we've covered, you can go back and watch those previous sessions through the Carlam Cymru website. Okay, so I'm hoping that by the end of today's session, you're going to be familiar with the 3 sections that you have to answer for the Unit 1 exam. I'm hoping that you will understand how to find the answers for the questions and how to structure a response for them. And I'm hoping that you will be familiar with the mark scheme and the success criteria. So let's have a think before we start now. What is the exam actually going to look like? So you're going to be sitting the AS Unit 1 exam, which is 2.5 hours long. And you're going to have 3 sections that you have to deal with. And obviously each section, as you know, will test a subject that you have already prepared. So section 1, section A, is the music, video and advertising section. Section B is the news, and section C is the film in Wales and Hollywood. And as you will be aware, section B and section C should take about 40 minutes each. They're often one short answer and one longer answer on each topic. So you'd have one short answer on news, one longer answer on news, one short answer on film, one longer answer. And obviously the music video is the one where you're going to get the audio visual resource to start with. All right, so let's think about this paper now then. So you sat there in the exam and you've got the paper in front of you. There's a couple of things you need to check. Make sure you've got the Unit 1 and that you're ready and prepared for that Unit 1 exam. You're going to view an audiovisual resource and you're going to have time to make notes for that. And it really is important that you make notes because what you get are the visual ideas, the stimuli for the essay that you're going to be writing. And you're going to need those ideas to give you the examples that you have to refer to. You've got to have plenty of black pens. Go in there prepared. If you like highlighters to make your notes, take highlighters with you as well, but make sure you've got more than one pen. And as you're going through, the good idea is to refer to the theorists and back up your analysis of the examples. So when you're making those notes for the visual stimuli, obviously thinking about how you can apply theory to those notes. And then as you're going through the section B and the section C, seeing if you can bring the theorists into those answers so that you're backing up everything you're saying. Always important to think about the timing of the paper, and as we've already said, it will be 40 minutes on sections B and C, which leaves you an hour and 10 minutes on section A. So you'll start by watching the video and then you make your notes on it, and then you will get the next 2 questions. When you look at the marks on the paper, think about how many marks you've got for the answer and gauge how much you need to write to get those marks. Obviously, if you've got a 10-mark question and a 20-mark question, you're going to be trying to write double the amount for the 20-mark question. It's really simple stuff, but that can make a massive difference for you when you work through it. When you're going through each section, make sure you're referring to the set texts. So the texts that you've been studying in class with your teacher, because you need to show a breadth of understanding. You've got to be able to give examples and show them why you think the things that you think. It actually specifies use relevant theories and subject-specific terminology where appropriate. That where appropriate is really important. You need to bring in the terms, you need to use the terms to analyse, but it needs to be the ones which are appropriate to what you're studying. So obviously make sure that you're familiar with a range of terms and make sure you've got the relevant theories to go. Sometimes the question specifies a theorist, so you need to make sure you include that one. Sometimes it doesn't, so you just bring in the ones that are relevant for you. You will have seen this conceptual framework several times as you've gone through your course. These are the key areas that you study when you're looking at the media stimulus that you're examining in the classroom. So you've been learning and sort of studying media language, the media industry, the audiences and the way they interact with the media, and you've been looking at the representations and how they're presented in the media. So each of those 4 will be tested across your exam paper. Some questions will focus more on one aspect than the others, but all 4 will be tested in the exam and you need to demonstrate that understanding. So when you're looking at the media language, you're looking at how those codes and conventions and the techniques create meaning. You're examining how it's been put together and you're looking at camera angles and you're looking at font styles and those sorts of things. When you're looking at the industry, you're looking at how the product is shaped by who owns it, produces it, and distributes it. And that's true of the film, of the news, and of the music video and advertising. So how are those aspects of the media shaped by the owners, producers, and distributors? When you're looking at the representations, you're looking at how the media represent events or issues or places or social cultural groups. So you're trying to look at how groups of people or certain issues are being represented in the media, and especially useful when you're looking at the news here, talking about those representations, and advertising, it works really well as well. And then finally, when you're looking at the audience, you're examining how those audiences or the users respond and interact with the media. And how they respond to what they're seeing and reading about. So across your paper, you've done selling images. So you've looked at music video and you've looked at advertising. And in the last couple of past papers, they've had a charity advert, a stimulus from a charity advert, as well as some print-based adverts to look at. So you've had a range of stimuli in the exam. You will also have studied film in Wales and Hollywood, where you will have studied a pair of films and you will have examined the ways in which they are produced, the way in which they deal with key themes, how the narrative structure works. You will also have looked at news in the online age, and you will have studied a newspaper, a news website, and a radio programme. So when you get to the exam, you need to have revised all of those aspects and revised the ones that you've done with your teacher in class. And you need to be really familiar with them so that you can use them as examples where appropriate. So those set texts are your repertoire, if you like, for your answers. They're the backup that you've got for when you come to analysing different examples. Okay, so we've talked a little bit already about theory, and the exam said that it needed relevant theories applied. And you have to be able to refer to a range of theorists. But again, you will have studied these as you go through your exam. You do not need to mention every single theorist in every single answer, but you need to be able to refer to the ones that are relevant at the time. Okay. So for media language, you will have studied semiotics, narratology, and genre theory. So you will be familiar and be using the names Barthes, Todorov, and Neil for the exam answers that you're doing. And you can see in the brackets, I've said for which section these theorists are considered relevant. And Barthes, you need to know really well, it's going to show up on every section of your paper, or could possibly show up on every section of your paper. The narratology and the genre are more suited to the film, and you're going to use them to help you analyse the films and looking at the structure and how the story comes together. When it comes to the representations, you've got 2 key theorists here. You've got Hall and you've got Gauntlet. Hall is going to help you with representations, including ethnicity, and you're going to use Hall in the selling images and in the news online. And with the Gauntlet theories, the critical perspectives on identity, you're going to use those in the music video and the advertising, the selling images. Obviously, the audience is a really key aspect of what you study, and you've got 4 here that you're going to look at. You've got Gerbner, Hall again, but with a different theory, Bandura and Shirky. So if you have a look here, you've got the cultivation theory by Gerbner, the reception theory from Hall, and again, look, the reception theory can be used in A, B, and C. So you're going to need to know that one really well, be really comfortable with applying that to a range of different media texts. And then you've got Shirky and you've got Bandura, which are used in obviously section A for the music video, and Shirky is going to come into the news online. Okay, so just a range of theorists there. And I thought it might be useful this evening just to recap some of these theorists and to think about how you might use the terminology in order to bring those theories in. Please don't worry if you haven't covered these theorists with your teacher yet, you will be covering these as you go through. And you can always come back and revisit this then if you want to sort of remind yourself of a key theorist. But please don't worry if you've not come across them yet. Okay, so what I've got is for each of the key theorists, I've got a brief overview for you. I've got some of the key terms, and I've got some of the ways that you might like to apply them. So Bart's is our first one, and he was the one that you're going to use on every section. And what's really good about Bart's is that it helps you to break down the images in terms of the codes, the signs that are being used. And you talk about the sort of denotation and the connotation of the images. So perhaps a really easy example, if we're looking at a rose that is being presented in a video, in a music video, your denotation of that is it's a flower. It's a red flower, quite possibly. But connotations of a red rose being given, especially if it's been given from one person to another person, you start to look at romance and you start to look at the connotations of love and you start to look at the connotations of perhaps Valentine's Day, relationships. It suggests so much more than it really is. And this is where Bart's can come in really useful, that you start to look at the codes that are being given to you, which you almost automatically read because you're so familiar with them. And you can use Bart's to look at the clothing, to look at the expressions on the actors' faces in the music videos. You might want to look at the colours, the fonts, the images. It's all sorts of things you can look at. And obviously make sure you're familiar with those key terms of semiotics, ideology, polysemic, mise-en-scène and iconography, because you can use those to help you look at Bart's. Okay, so the next one we've got is Todorov, and you're probably very familiar with Todorov. He's somebody that you will have looked at when you've done stories in English, for example. You might have looked at Todorov if you did GCSE media studies. And he's a really good one for looking at how a story has a structure. And what Todorov did was suggest that all stories have a very similar structure and they all start with an equilibrium which gets disrupted, so leads to the disequilibrium. Then you've got the conflict and the resolution. And we're talking about ideological concepts here and maybe the sort of recognition of a problem or conflict that is linked to hegemonic ideals, the sort of key ideals of the society of the time. So he's a really, really good one, really good to look at films, and you can link Todorov to Neil and the genre theory when you're looking at the structures of genres and how they come together as well. You've also got the little bit about the hero's journey there, which is not one of the AS theories, but it's quite a nice one to look at with Todorov because it's the idea of the journey of the main character and how they develop in a story, and could be quite useful when you're looking at film. Neil, with the genre theory. So what you've got here is the idea that genres are by essence repetition, so they repeat ideas, but they can also be built up by difference, variation and change. That's how they're going to keep you interested. So with Neil, you're looking at the mass production of certain ideas and the way in which things are produced. You might be looking at how intertextual references are used to help create certain aspects of a genre. You might be looking at the cultural relevance or the institutional and industrial context of the programs that you're studying or the newspaper that you're looking at. So when you're looking at Neil, you're going to be looking at how certain programs are popular and how they generate interest through the genre conventions that they use. Okay, so we're working our way through, we're on to Hall. And Hall is the one that we're going to use when we're looking at representations and looking at the cultural capital that we use to deconstruct the images that we see in front of us, the way in which things are represented. Some of the really useful key terms with Hall are to do with stereotypes, ethnocentrism, looking at what is signified or denoted by the images that you're looking at. And it's really useful to be looking at how different groups are represented in the media, and you can use this in all of the key media forms. Gauntlet talks about how we use the media. So Gauntlet is a really good one when you're trying to look at what an audience gains from the media that they're interacting with. And so Gauntlet talks about how the media provides us with tools or resources that we can use to construct our own identity. Historically, it used to be quite singular, quite simplistic. Now, however, in this sort of more modern day, things are a lot more diverse, and we've got a huge range of representations, identities that are being shown in the media. And so we start to pick and choose the ways in which we want to identify ourselves and the things that we want to link ourselves to. So you've got all sorts of key terms that you can use here, including obviously representations, which you're going to be analysing as you go through. Okay, really useful to look at how the audiences relate to the media that they're examining and consuming. Okay, Gerbner. Gerbner talks about how we become shaped by the media that we watch and how long-term exposure to certain representations will have an impact on the way in which we view the world around us. So you talk about being cultivated or influenced. You talk about dominant ideologies and the hegemonic norms, the gender norms that are being presented to us. And we would look at this when we're examining audiences and how they're influenced by the media. And how do we choose our media? Do we choose our media because of our beliefs, or do our beliefs come from our media text? So are we choosing things to watch because they fit the way we view the world, or does the way we view the world get shaped by the media that we're watching? It's a really interesting conundrum, and it's something that you'll be looking at when you look at Gerbner. Okay, and then we're on to the reception theory with Hall. And if you remember Hall, Hall is the one that talks about how we can find our way into a text in different ways. So we can have a dominant reading, a negotiated reading, or an oppositional reading. That sometimes we come to the text and we accept the dominant reading because we just have the same values and ideals as they do. Sometimes we watch a text and you don't quite agree with it, but you still find your way into it. You still find a way to understand what they're saying and accept it. And sometimes you oppose what you're seeing. So there is a position that you take as you're watching, and that is shaped by the way in which you view the world around you. Okay, and again, you've got some useful vocabulary there. And again, this is going to be for audience. Bandura is a really interesting one, and it's one that has slightly become outdated now. And I remember doing Bandura when I was doing my degree, so many, many years ago. And it talks about how the media can influence people. And this is the one that we often used to look at when we were looking at violence in the media, and whether violence in the media is fueled a rise in violence in society. So Bandura is the one that talks about how children might learn aggressive behaviour from viewing aggressive behaviour on the media, and that the media directly influences the audiences. Nowadays, there are more sophisticated audience theories out there, but it could be useful to perhaps look at how an audience who simply accepts the hegemonic norms that are being presented to them might be influenced by the aggression or the misogynistic views that are being presented. So you might want to use that one if you're looking at children and how children are affected by the news, or perhaps how young girls might be affected by the images of femininity that are presented in the music videos. So although he is slightly outdated, he is still useful to look at the influence. And certainly if you think with the current worries about the way in which social media is fueling a rise in anxiety in young girls, you might want to look at Bandura to try and explain that. Okay. And then shirky is only used for that end of audience idea. The idea that the way we are moving with the internet and digital technology is changing the relations between media and individuals. And he kind of talks about how audience is no longer a passive consumer, because we now speak back challenge, interact with the media that we watch. We no longer sit there and consume it, we interact with it and we make it ours in some way. So this is where we're talking about sharing ideas on digital media and perhaps getting involved with watch parties where you're all consuming the same product, but you're all maybe discussing it and arguing about it as you're going. So it's a really interesting one to look at modern audiences and the way in which they engage with the media. So very different to Bandura. Okay, so I can't show you the music video, but you can watch this for yourselves. I've given you a little link to the YouTube video if you want to watch it. I don't know what videos you've watched, but I thought it might be quite nice to have a look at some ideas now to start thinking about how we apply all of these things. So if you wanted to watch that music video at home, you could make notes perhaps on the story of this video. This one particularly has got a really lovely, clear story structure to it. It's nicely developed. You can see it very carefully. There's some fantastic costumes in this video that you could have a look at. The color codes we can look at in a moment. Intertextuality, there are some very obvious links to other media texts, and it's quite a good one to look at for that. Technical codes we're going to look at in a moment, and maybe the editing choices. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we look at some stills from the video. So I took some stills from the YouTube video of this song. So Taylor Swift, Love Story. And we start with this establishing shot, which obviously creates a sense of place. And you might start to think about what mood and atmosphere is being created by this. You might want to start thinking about what sort of ideas are being presented about the characters, if they're being presented in this school or even university setting. I'm not entirely sure how old she's meant to be in this video, but you've got this school-like building and the flagpole, which clearly gives you a sense of place. You've also got the establishing shot there, so that nice wide angle to show you where they are. Then the video shows Taylor Swift, and not Taylor Swift as the artist, but Taylor Swift as a character in this story. So she is the young female being presented as obviously quite innocent. Look at the colour of her hair, look at the way the light is hitting her. Okay, so you could have an absolute field day looking at this one in terms of the lighting, in terms of the colours that are being presented to you here. You might want to look at the props. What is she carrying? How do they help to create a sense of character and a sense of purpose in the story? As she's walking into the school building, into the academic building, she's carrying big, thick books showing that she's going to study. She's wearing fairly indistinct clothing. There's nothing that stands out about the clothing that she's wearing. She fits into that milieu of the student there quite nicely. But again, look at the camera here. Quite a wide shot again. We've got half of her and she walks into that camera, so she gets closer towards it. The camera doesn't move, she does, so she moves into the camera. But what you get, which is quite nice, is as she's walking, she glances across and the camera changes its perspective and the camera goes across to the young man here who is sat at the tree, and she looks a couple of times. She's obviously drawn to him and the camera angle changes a couple of times to show you this. And again, look at the way he's positioned in the shot. Clearly other people around, but he looks quite isolated there with his back against a tree. He's reading, so there's something academic again being presented about him. Dressed all in black, is there a reason for that? And you might want to look at the way the music fits in behind it now, because the diegetic music is starting to come in as we go through. Sorry, non-diegetic at this point, isn't it, actually, sorry. Then, as she's walking towards him, there's some interesting editing, which means that we get these snapshots of the two, the male and the female that we've just seen here, Taylor Swift and the gentleman, in period costume. Obviously in a very intense moment, dancing together, staring into each other's eyes. And she's seeing that as she's walking, and you know it's her because the camera goes straight back to her face. So it's almost like you're seeing inside her mind as she's thinking about why is she attracted to this boy, or what has she seen this boy before. And then the song starts. So up until this point, we've just had the music, then the song starts, and she is presented as an artist now, as a singer. She's singing in this window. Interesting viewpoint again. Look at the way the camera's worked here. The building dominates. She's up on a balcony, which obviously gives you that sense of Romeo and Juliet quite clearly. And she's wearing a very interesting costume if you want to start looking at the dress and the things that that suggests as well. And obviously, again, look at the lighting, very similar lighting between the three different images of her, that very pale hair with that bright light, making it look golden, picking up on the colours. And she sings in this song, and she starts with "It's a love story." You'll know the words much better than I do, but she talks about Romeo and Juliet. So you have that intertextual reference because obviously you've got the balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet, and she's up high on this balcony, talking to the audience or singing to the audience. So it's a really interesting thing to look at and start pulling apart all the different connotations. You're going to be able to use a lot of Barts in this one. You're going to be able to talk about the representations of femininity. You're going to be able to talk about the representations of masculinity. You're going to be able to talk about the representations of romance and partnerships, the relationships here. So you've got all sorts of different things that you can start to deconstruct using the theorists that we've just mentioned, and then obviously the codes and conventions of a music video as well. So something you could do for yourselves, you could definitely look at this and consider what you're seeing here. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some ideas, something that you can take away with you there to help you look at music video. Obviously, the other thing that you look at are the adverts. So it's selling images through music video and adverts. And a couple of years ago, the WJC put these two adverts into a past paper, and it was used as one of the questions. So what you might want to think about with this one, you might want to think about the layout. Where's the branding? How do we know who's made this? Where's the brand name? Where's the product? Think about what that suggests about the importance of that product. Look at how much space the product and the name take up. Look at the language. Be an inspiration, modern muse. Look at perhaps the language connotations here. They're suggesting that you can be an inspiration if you use this perfume. They're talking about modern muse, so they're using that alliteration where you've got those two words coming together and standing quite strongly there, modern muse. Again, why? What does that suggest? What is that suggesting about the young girl who is obviously the centre of attention? Although she's not the centre of the image, you've got the girls around her all looking at her. So everybody's attention, all the eyes are going towards the girl here, who is obviously the main model in this advert. If you look at the words by the side of her, every day is an opportunity to start again and be better. Misty Copeland, the principal ballerina. So she's being shown as an inspiration to these young girls, that every day she can improve. What theorists could you use maybe to start breaking this down? Who could you use to look at the representations of femininity? Who could you look at to examine the codes and conventions that are being presented? What is being used to create that idea of a ballet scene? So the mise en scène, what's gone into this altogether to make it feel like a ballet studio? We've already kind of mentioned that the camera isn't quite focused on her centrally, but clearly all the attention is drawn to her, and she's in the strong third on the left hand side. She's in that strong third and she dominates that third, so everything is drawn to her, especially when you consider that on the other side it's fading out, it's muted out. You might want to look at the mode of address, the idea that it is ordering you to be an inspiration. So you have the sort of strong orders that make you think about it, the imperative voice that makes you think about how you could use that perfume to be an inspiration. And then obviously at the corner there, I've got colour connotations. What about all these muted pinks and whites and pale colours? Why have they been used? What do they suggest about the characters in this advert? So again, something that you could now pause with, and you could maybe jot some ideas down. You could write a response here. How is this advert creating a sense of gender? How is femininity being presented in this advert? And it's quite an interesting one to analyse, especially when you consider how strong a principal ballerina is. Look at the muscle definition on her leg there, where she's got it on point. She's ready to stand up and dance at any point, at any moment. But look how strong she is. And then consider how feminine everything in this advert is. Okay, so there's another advert to compare it with. And this is Bel Hadid, the new generation's favourite. And if you look at the language codes this time, don't crack under pressure. And the language here, I always found this quite interesting. She's beautiful, vivacious, luminous, and free-spirited. She gets through pressure. She glides through pressure, sorry. So don't crack under pressure is the perfect motto for her. So again, what theorists could you bring in here? How could you apply some of those people that you've been studying to this? How are you going to deconstruct these images to think about it? Do you want to think about the reception theory? How are people going to accept the messages here? Are they going to oppose them? You might want to think about how we could construct our own ideas of identity around this one. So Gauntlet could come in here. Look at the codes and conventions of an advert itself. Where is the branding? Where is the product? And think about how attention is being drawn to it. Think about the colours. The green, the red of the tag her, the branding, but the black of her boxing glove. This time, she dominates the frame of the camera, so you might want to think about how she's been framed. She's obviously important. She's definitely challenging. She's looking straight at you, so she's drawing attention to you. So think about the way the camera draws attention to her. The fact that she's got the boxing glove in her teeth. She's independent. She's going to get herself ready. She doesn't need somebody else to glove her up. So she's ready there. What else could you talk about? You could talk about, again, the colour connotations. You could talk about the layout here and the language code. So lots of things to examine. And again, you could pause it. You could compare the two adverts. You could deconstruct how they represent women. Okay, so if we've done section A there, we've looked at music video and we've looked at selling images. The second section that you've got to look at are the newspapers. So I've got a selection of papers there, which the WJC put in some of their worksheets. And it's really interesting to stop and have a think about the conventions of a newspaper to start off with. What have they got in common? What do they all have, or what do some of them not have that others do? You might want to think about who makes it onto the front page and why it's made it onto the front page. You might want to think about location. And remember, when you're talking about news values, you're talking about why certain stories have made it into the news. And in a British paper, why have some of those stories hit the news? Well, because they're so massive, they're so important, or they were so important. You might want to think about when these stories hit the paper and how long does it take before a story becomes front page news. You might want to think about those news values that are considered to choose the front page story, because obviously the front page is the most important story. What makes it onto the front page? And then how do those front pages communicate the story? In preparing for your exam, it's a really good idea to be following the news and to be collecting stories that are hitting the news. So, for example, with my classes at the moment, I would be collecting things about King Charles. I would be collecting things about the story of his health and how that's breaking and how that's carried through. Look at a story that's going to be there for a couple of days, not just one that hits the paper and then is gone again. You need that longevity of a story. And they need to be hard news stories usually. So you're looking for things on politics or things on, what else makes it into the hard news? Finance and that sort of thing. So businesses, finance, obviously wars. So things that are important, considered to be worthy of study. Okay, so front page, consider what's hitting the front page, and then compare that. Look at your set texts. How does it make it on the websites? How does it make it on the radio? Have they got the same stories running? Do you have different perspectives on different formats? What's going on with those stories? Okay, so it's a really good one to be comparing across your forms and examining how that story has been presented in the different set texts that you've got. Okay, film then is the next one. And with film, you might want to think about some of the genre. You might want to think about how stories are presented and how genre is a significant part of the way in which we read a film or watch a film. So you may have studied horror when you were doing it. And posters are a good place to start. So you can see around this poster some of the annotations that one of my students did when they were looking at this poster. They were using this as a way of examining the horror or the psychological thriller genre. So they were looking for ways in which this demonstrated the genre. And they started deconstructing it, and they were looking at the language codes. So they were looking at the film director. They were looking at the lighting, at the image itself. They were looking at the way in which the horror is built up. So you've got the shadow of the woman there, but actually the woman isn't there. So you've got that build up of that horror. And then obviously the suggested codes and conventions. It's a house in the middle of nowhere. There's nowhere to run for help. So with an image like that, you're thinking about the codes and conventions of horror. You're thinking about the codes and conventions of a film poster. You're thinking about how a poster like that could engage an audience. How does it publicize the film that's coming? In what way does this drum up an audience for a film that's coming into the cinema? Obviously looking at the release date here as well of July the 19th when it's going to come out. So with the film, it's a good thing to have a nice grounding in deconstructing the posters before them, just to think about how those posters generate the interest for the film that you've been studying. And I would imagine that you've probably looked at the publicity material for the two films that you've studied and thought about how those audiences were created. So this is another way of looking at genre, analysing images, and you might want to think this time about how you could use some of the theory that you've been studying and bring that to your reading of this image. So you can see some questions here. How do these images suggest a genre? How are iconic traits repeated, reinforced, and extended across the horror genre? So again, a horror image. Evaluate how far this picture suggests a sense of narrative. You know, what's going on in that story? How do you know? And there's some quite interesting points to be brought out of this one. And then you might want to consider with your film, is there a difference in style and purpose between the British and American films? So considering the producers and distributors of the film and considering the money that goes into them, what is the difference, and how do the Welsh film industry compete with the Hollywood industry? So there's some quite interesting points to be thought about and considered when you're looking at the film. Okay, so coming towards the end now and thinking about what's that going to look like in the exam. So here is one exam paper, and this is taken from the 2018 Unit 1 paper. So the first paper after they changed the format. And your audio-visual resource for this one was a television advert for the Samsung Galaxy smartphone. And you can see here the instructions for the way in which to approach it. So you have a minute to read the question, then you see the ad 3 times, then you watch the advert, then you're allowed to watch the advert again and make notes. Then it pauses, you don't see a video for 5 minutes while you make some notes. Then you get to watch the video for a third and final time and you make your final notes. And then you'll be given time to answer question 1. that part of the exam paper is very strictly timed, and the video will just run basically. So the video just runs, and then you have the 5-minute pause in the middle of that video when it just goes to a blank screen, but it keeps running, and then the video comes back again. So this part of the video of the exam is really tightly controlled. But after that, you've got to be watching your own time, and you've got to be managing your time yourselves. Okay. So the question you had with that audiovisual resource was, explore how media language is used in the television advert to attract audiences. And I'm sure that your teacher will have been talking to you about how you explode that answer now, how you focus in on the keywords in that question, and how you start to think about what you need to do for it. And that word explore is a lovely word to see in exam. It means that they want you to try and find lots of different examples. It wants you to be looking at a breadth of resources to be able to analyse in some depth. It gives you a focus. It says media language. So you're going to be looking at the technical, visual and audio codes. You're also going to be looking at the audience themselves and who might be attracted to that, why they might be attracted to it. So some definite theory that's going to come in there in terms of the audience theory that you're going to be referring to. So that was section A. Section B, the news, remembering that you've got to answer all questions. What we didn't do was look at the marks for this question. So with section A, you've got 40 marks available for that answer. That's a long extended answer. Question 2 and question 3, you've got 30 marks available. So there's 100 marks on the paper altogether. 30 marks for news, 30 marks for film. You have to answer both sections of, start again. You have to answer all sections, and you have to answer both parts of the question in 2 and 3. So it's not an either or, you have to answer everything. So with the news, explain how recent technological developments have changed the way news is distributed, and explore how one event has been represented across the 2 media products that you've studied. So again, really nice open questions, giving you a chance to show your knowledge, giving you a chance to explain what you've seen, and obviously use that terminology, use those theorists, okay? So with the technological developments, you're looking at the way news is changing, how we're accessing it on more mobile platforms, how we're able to access it on the internet so that we can watch on demand, all of those sorts of things. And then obviously you then choose the one event that you've been studying and you explain how that's been presented across the 2 news products you've chosen. With the film, you've got the co-production and the importance of the co-production for the Welsh film industry. So you have to refer to the Welsh film. So whichever one you've chosen, you look at that one. And then how conventional is the narrative structure of one of the films you've studied? So it would be quite nice there if you've done the Welsh film for question 3A, it would be nice to do your partner film for 3B, but it doesn't specify it. You could use either. Okay. So those are the types of questions you're going to get. And again, if you're revising, you could very easily take those questions now and practice those questions. And what I've got for you is some suggestions of what's expected for you. So the examiner wants you to explore different aspects of media language and look at the different aspects of it. So they want you to analyze the camera shots. They want you to look at the movement, the editing and the pace. So when you're looking at that Samsung advert, that audiovisual resource, you need to break down as many of the elements as you can. The examiner says that a best essay has got an intro. All right, so in your intro, you're going to address the question and just basically show you understand what you're being asked to do. You're going to name your set texts that you're using as examples. You're going to make sure you've explained the hard news story. You're going to show that knowledge of your set texts, so you're referring to them in detail. You're going to have detailed analysis of them. You're going to make sure there's a balance if more than one set product has been requested, and you're going to put the theory in. So if you've got an explicit theory being asked for, you're going to make sure you include it, and you're going to have a conclusion that takes you back to that question. And obviously you have to make sure your essay is the appropriate length for the marks available. So when it's a 20-mark question, it's going to be quite developed. So I've given you the 20-mark mark scheme. So you've got the 2 assessment objectives being looked at. And if you look at the top marks, so the band 5, excellent, detailed, accurate knowledge, excellent application, perceptive, detailed exploration. All right, so the key words here are excellent, detailed, perceptive, in-depth. Yeah, you're trying to show a really good knowledge and you're trying to bring in the subject-specific terminology. You're trying to bring in the theorists where relevant. And these are pretty much the same on all the different question mark schemes, similar words in those bands. All right, so you're trying to give a nice detailed answer, you're trying to build it up. If you're revising, there are some really good resources out there from the WJC. So I would personally search for WJC Knowledge Organisers Media Studies, and you'll get one for newspapers, you'll get one for film, you'll get one for music videos. Some really good resources out there. Obviously, you have access to their past papers. You just go on the Media Studies A-level site for the WJC, click on the past papers, and you will see 3 different past papers for the years that they've been running this. They've also got an exam walkthrough. So again, you'd have to be specific, type in WJEC exam walkthrough for media studies, and there is a unit 1 paper there that an examiner has talked you through what to do and how to do it. So really useful. So what can you carry on doing now to revise? What could you do to help you get ready for your exam? You need to know the terminology. So revise your notes specifically for the key sections that you've got. So music, video and advertising, revise the terminology that you were using, look at the examples so that you know how to break them down. Make sure you know your set texts. So make sure you're really familiar with the things that your teacher has asked you to study. So for news, the 3 different elements of the news that you've studied, the newspaper, the news website, or the 2 news websites actually, and the radio programme. I would be watching both the films that I've been studying as well. I'd make sure that I knew them. I'd make sure that I perhaps did some work on their publicity and how they were distributed and how they reached their audiences, that sort of thing. I'd make sure I know the key terminology. All right, for each aspect that I've been studying of the media, making sure I know those key words and making sure I'm really comfortable with industry, distribution and production for the text that I've been studying. And obviously, as we've been trying to show you this evening, the theorists are important. Please go back and have a look at them. So I've got the ticks coming up before I've got the pointers. So I was trying to make you familiar with the 3 sections. So I'm hoping that you are now familiar with those 3 sections. I was trying to give you ways to find answers, and I hope you would be able to now find some answers for those questions and how to build up that response. And I'm hoping that you are nice and familiar with that mark scheme and that success criteria. So diolch yn fawr iawn am ddod heno. Thank you very much. And I hope you've had something that you found useful.